Hi, everyone, once again, and welcome back to Teal Talks. My name is Holly. I am one of the counselors/advocates at the Lebanon SARCC office, and I use she, her pronouns.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chris. I also use she, her pronouns, and I am one of the other counselors/advocates at SARCC Lebanon. So, for those of you who might have tuned in last week or some of the weeks before, you might know that it is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And the theme of this Sexual Assault Awareness Month is safe online spaces. So, in some of our other videos, we've talked a little bit about some of the more negative sides of social media when it comes to things like unconsensual image sharing or even about setting boundaries. But today we wanted to focus on some of the more positive things related to social media, specifically within the sexual violence movement. So there have been some really positive outcomes and some really positive ways that social media has impacted this movement. One of those being that it has created spaces for survivors' voices to be amplified and to be heard in ways that they weren't really being heard or amplified before. So some examples of this are the hashtag #MeToo movement or the hashtag Why I Didn't Report movement. There's been some others, but these are two of the big ones that people might be a little bit more familiar with.
Yeah, and with these hashtags and the communities that have formed online, we have seen survivors make decisions to disclose and come forward about their experiences online in a way that we hadn't previously seen before. With these hashtags and with these communities that have now been built, survivors now have felt empowered in a way that they can tell their stories, they can disclose their experiences, and really share their voices about their sexual assault and sexual violence experiences and be welcomed in these online communities.
So, the pain of trauma is often experienced in isolation. And when it comes to sexual assault, there's a lot of factors that we're going to talk a little bit about related to why people don't disclose or don't come forward. So, a lot of people and a lot of survivors are processing those things by themselves. And online spaces have kind of created spaces where people can contribute to healing, growth, community, connection, and things like that, connecting with other survivors, hearing other people's stories, and just having some of that like normalization and validation for the things that they've experienced or the way that they've been impacted.
And although we love to celebrate and point out the way that social media and online has really built these communities and has encouraged survivors to be able to tell their stories, it's really important to discuss the barriers to coming forward, especially when we think about the conversations that often occur around survivors who report online and who may not have shared their stories before, or the questions that often come out. We've noticed that when survivors are sharing their stories online, we often see conversations around, well, why didn't you report it? Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you go to police about that? And I think it's really important that when we see those conversations and when we think about survivors sharing their stories online, it's important to discuss the barriers that survivors face when sharing their stories and when reporting in general as well.
So one of
So,
those big,
oh, I
oh,
apologize.
sorry, Holly.
We had a flow and we're going to continue.
It's
So go
okay. We'll
ahead,
pick
Chris.
back up on it. I just temporarily disrupted it, but it's okay.
No,
We're
I
just
love
gonna
it. Go on.
back in. So one of those barriers is shame. And in real life, there are some really different feelings of that versus when I'm disclosing online and I might be doing that anonymously. It might not come directly from my profile. It might be like on Reddit, for instance, where my account is just a username that I've created that you really can't tell who I am from that username. But shame in real life is a huge barrier, and even online. So much of the time we see victim blaming, we see slut shaming, we see different things like that that really contribute to why somebody wouldn't want to disclose, or even just shame related to feeling responsible for what happened. Really good examples like someone who went to a party and felt like because they were drinking that all of these things that happened were their fault, when in reality that's not the case. It is not their fault. But you can feel a lot of shame about that. And it poses some real barriers to people disclosing to other people in their life or just in general.
An additional barrier to people coming forward is this feeling that someone might not be believed. In considering these online spaces that have been created, we have noticed that it's a community. It's a hashtag in which many people have now shared their stories. And when you have to report an experience, there is that fear of disclosing to someone who may not have the reaction that you're looking for, who may not believe your story. And to do that can bring shame, it can bring embarrassment, and it can be really, really hard to have to face those reactions as well.
Like Holly mentioned, there's a lot of stigmas about sexual assault and who sexual assault happens to, which is very problematic. So people might say things, well, sexual assault doesn't happen to somebody like you, which is so harmful and just a really horrible thing to say. Don't say it ever. But it's a really big problem where some people think, like, I don't really fit the stereotype or the image, quote unquote, of who sexual assault happens to. And because of that, somebody is not believed, which I think ties a little bit into lack of credibility, which is another big barrier to why people don't disclose. So, credibility, particularly in the legal system, is something that comes up a lot. And you hear this for those of you who may have gone through the legal system or know somebody who has, a lot of times they look at how credible you are as a witness or as a quote unquote victim. And I'm using that terminology just because in the legal world, it's victim and defendant, and they don't typically use the word survivor. But in that capacity, we hear this a lot, and that's something that poses a lot of challenges. And Holly mentioned about reporting to police, and that's something we hear a lot too, or survivors hear a lot too, which is why I love the hashtag why I didn't report hashtag. I don't want to say the word with the word, but I know how else to say it. If you haven't heard of it or you're curious about it, definitely look it up. And it gives you some really good examples about why someone wouldn't report to police. But with that credibility, I wanted to mention something, just another example. Sorry, how very long winded. And I know you want to say something too. But I think one of those examples is, for instance, people with substance abuse issues, people who are involved in sex work, are often viewed as quote unquote not credible because of the work they do or because of their issues with substance abuse. Mental health disorders fall into this too, where people think that because this person has substance abuse issues or mental health issues, that we can't really view their story as reliable or credible, when in reality, that doesn't diminish or minimize or dismiss the sexual assault that they've experienced.
Definitely. And as Chris was talking about, both stigma, lack of credibility, and as I had mentioned, that feeling that you might not be believed, I think it's important to really recognize those conversations and those sayings that we've all heard before, whether it's victim blaming, whether it's the what were you wearing, were you drinking, where were you, why did you go there? Those questions are real, and they are really important to kind of think about how that would impact a survivor's desire to report and how that could impact your feelings if you were to get those messages. And so, moving forward with thinking about reporting or disclosing online versus reporting or disclosing in person, there's an anonymity that exists online. Being able to share your story without having to put your face to it, that exists, that can be really powerful and really empowering to a lot of people. You don't have to face the backlash. You can be able to finally disclose what happened to you and be able to get the support that you want without having to worry about all of those negative impacts and barriers that might have been rushing through your mind throughout the entire other time that reporting in person might come with.
So there's a few examples of cases that I think are very kind of common and notorious and notable that are good examples of how social media played a positive role in them. One of them being the Brock Turner case. I'm sure everybody tuning into this is familiar with who Brock Turner is, and I kind of want to shift the attention away from Brock Turner and more onto Chanel Miller, who is the person who released, the survivor in this case, who released her victim impact statement on social media after feeling dismissed by the judge and just really not heard by the judge due to the sentence that Brock Turner got, despite her reading, I believe it's over like a 7,000 word victim impact statement, which is really beautiful. You can find it online. She also has a little short film on YouTube if you just type in Chanel Miller short. That is super, super powerful. I highly recommend watching it. But she released her impact statement online and it blew up. It was so powerful. She got so many positive messages of support from different people around the world, people who were also survivors relating to her and to her experience. And that's just one example of how social media could be super positive, super empowering. So even though she didn't get the sentence that she felt was justice, she got this sense of community and healing from the support that she received online.
Definitely. And I'm actually going to give three more examples.
Okay, huh?
So when we think about offenders such as Bill Cosby, Weinstein, as well as just the Me Too movement as a whole, we have seen a surge in people coming forward. And I think it's important to recognize that survivors are not gender based. So we've seen survivors of all genders, of all sexual orientations, come forward and describe their experiences. And it has been really, really powerful because we can see how there really is strength in numbers and how that also has impacted sometimes belief, sometimes just the power in changing law and just the power of community online as well.
And I think in cases like the ones that have kind of come out of the Me Too movement, when there's a celebrity or somebody else in a position of power, despite their gender, despite their age, when we see someone of like high notoriety and they're sharing a story of sexual assault, I think it normalizes for other people and validates their experiences by recognizing a lot of people go through this. And when someone with that kind of platform speaks out about it, it makes it a little bit easier for other people to come forward too. And I think that's something that's just really beautiful about all of the people with those positions of power who have come forward and really spoke out against the sexual violent, well, for the sexual violent movement, but against sexual violence. So I think that's a really powerful example. Thanks for adding those in, Holly. I forgot about some of those actually.
Sure, and just to say, um, sometimes I'm a broken record with the phrases that I use, but this list is exhaustive. But that's really not what I want to say. I want to say that Chris and I use some examples that does not encompass all of the survivors' experiences, all of the examples that we've seen online, and of course, all of the survivors just generally that we hear about. I think that Chris makes a really powerful point that sometimes when we see celebrities come forward and share their experiences, that it opens the door for everyone to be able to start sharing their experiences, especially in ways that you may not have felt empowered to do so before. If someone in such a public image hasn't been able to do so, then maybe you are too. And that can be super powerful.
So, all of this to say that social media has really created space to change the narratives, beliefs, and ideas about sexual assault and sexual violence, which can therefore influence public opinion, which has been a really positive thing. So, social media has given us some more opportunities to raise awareness, to spread education, to get resources out to people, to publicize those resources. You'll see a lot of centers, even much like our own. We have Facebook, we have YouTube, we have Instagram. These live streams are really a big part of our social media outreach to just reach people who maybe aren't reaching services otherwise or aren't getting this information otherwise. So it has worked to, social media has helped us to really change those narratives, get some of these ideas and information out, and hopefully people who view these things like this, even this live stream or other forms of social media efforts, will start to think about sexual assault in a different way and really get out some information that's accurate and work to kind of debunk some of those myths and break down some of those barriers so people feel comfortable to disclose sexual assault in their real life, in their real lives, like online's not real life, in their personal lives. That we create safer spaces, not just online, but in our everyday lives for the survivors that we know and the survivors that we care about to feel comfortable, to feel safe, to share their story, for their voices to be heard.
And the starting of these conversations is only the beginning. And hopefully, we can see these conversations continue. And that is the way that we can see these stigmas change and the feelings behind disclosing in general change. I think that building these communities is truly amazing because people are supported in really, really amazing ways. The internet in general, I feel like I'm talking like an old person, as an old person. That was ridiculous, but has just opened doors and built communication in ways that is truly incredible. And just as Chris said, it can change the narratives, the understandings, the beliefs, the myths that exist. And that is how we can make a difference in the end. So we want to see these conversations continue because, as we had talked about in our child trafficking video, sexual assault isn't a myth, and it's really important to have these conversations so that everyone can feel comfortable talking about these experiences, because talking about it and recognizing it is the first step to preventing it from happening.
And like Holly mentioned earlier, and I think this is just an important thing to throw in, sexual assault doesn't have a particular person that it happens to. It happens to people of all genders, of all ages, of all different orientations, of different relationship dynamics. There's not just one person that this happens to. And I think that's so important to keep in mind, because the reality is that even if you don't know, you probably do know somebody who has experienced sexual assault. So making sure that we are practicing some of these things, being knowledgeable of these things, to create these spaces. I keep saying in real life, like online's not real life, but I just don't know how to say it, like in non-online spaces, is so important too. And I think that we have demonstrated through social media that it is possible to do that, and putting that same energy into our real life spaces is so important. So I think that there's a lot that we can learn from these positive impacts of social media and these senses of unity that we've seen with things like the Me Too movement, to kind of build people up and empower people rather than to shame people, to victim blame, to do other things like that, and just really believe survivors. So speaking of continuing the conversation, Holly.
We would love to hear from you in the comments below. And this is our last video of our Building Safe Online Spaces month of videos. So this video wraps up Sexual Assault Awareness Month. We were excited to have you all take part with us. And with that being the end of this month, that is not the end of our conversations. We want to see you in the comments, and we want to hear from you. If you have any conversations to add, any discussion around how the internet and just online spaces have changed the way in which we talk about sexual assault, the way in which it has opened doors for survivors to be able to come forward, or if you have suggestions for topics in the future, we'd love to hear from you.
Holly and I really tried to wear teal, but this was the closest we could get with some blue. We're sexual assault counselors and apparently don't own teal. We need to expand our wardrobe a little bit. So we tried, but if you are watching this in April, definitely find some teal in your closet, find something to wear and support Sexual Assault Awareness Month, or even participate in some of the Sexual Assault Awareness Month hashtags that are going around on Instagram or other social media platforms, for some more great information, resources, or just interaction with other people. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you all next week.